Everyone's chasing hyper-realistic graphics, endless open worlds, and the best jiggle physics. But what if the true path to innovation lies in embracing constraints? Forget those hyper-realistic titty and bulge jiggles in games, because we're about to explore how some of the best games in history were made with a fraction of the resources. And that says a lot about how modern AAA game development has lost its way, because I think the limitations of retro game design were a fertile ground for genuinely groundbreaking gameplay and user experiences that have the potential to reshape the industry's future. The constraint paradox. My setup here is pretty straightforward. Constraints aren't limitations, they're a forcing function for creativity. When you can't rely on graphics or processing power, you have to nail the fundamentals. Because you can't hide mid-gameplay behind photorealistic textures or distract the players with an endless feature list. The game either works or it doesn't. It's fun or it's not. So let me quickly break down the 4 ways why I think that. First is efficiency. When you're working with tight memory limits, you can't just add more. You're forced to optimize what you have. Retro game devs had to time the display of individual pixels down to the millisecond. They had to write efficient code or their games simply wouldn't run. Modern AAA games don't have this forcing function, so they have the freedom to ship with bloated code, massive install sizes, and performance issues. Just look at how limited color palettes forced creative visual storytelling in early games. Designers had to use exaggerated shapes, looking at you, Lara Croft-chan, because they couldn't just slap a texture on everything and call it a day. Memory constraints also created tight level design where every room, every enemy placement, every power-up location mattered. There was just no room for filler content or mistakes. Second, focus. You physically cannot add crafting and puzzles and companion systems and open world and loot boxes and battle passes and live service when you're working with just kilobytes of memory. You pick one thing and nail it. Gauntlet was just enter dungeon, fight things for treasure, so it had to make fighting things for treasure feel amazing. And I feel like this is where modern games fail the hardest. They see successful mechanics in other games and just slap them on without asking if they serve the core experience of what they are trying to ship. So you end up with action games that have crafting for no reason, shooters with RPG progression that doesn't matter, and open worlds where 80% of the content is just copy-pasted filler slop. Third, accessibility. Simple controls and clear mechanics become universally understandable. When you only have a few buttons, players know exactly what to do. When your gameplay loop is tight, players get it immediately. And those simple controls had to feel perfect. Because if you only have 2 buttons and a D-pad, those inputs better feel responsive as heck. And now compare that to modern games where you need a 2-hour-long tutorial because you're juggling 15 different button combinations and half of them feel like clunky shit. And last but not least, iteration. When you can't add more features, you polish what you have. You test the same mechanics over and over until they feel right. Retro devs spend months refining a single jump arc and enemy behavior, because that's all they had room for. While modern development often means adding half-baked features and hoping some of them stick, all while replacing your QA team with AI, Square Enix, and forcing deadlines so devs don't even have time to test properly. The indies are the best proof. Let's just quickly look at some recent examples so that nobody can tell me this is just some theory about games from the 80s. Balatro is a solo dev project. Developer Local Thunk made a poker roguelike in his spare time while working an IT job, with essentially no budget beyond a $100 Steam publishing fee and commissioning a soundtrack from Fiverr. The game sold over 5 million copies, has a 90+ Metacritic score, and won Game of the Year at the GDC Awards 2025. It beat AAA games with $100 million budgets, and Balatro is a perfect example for this discussion because Local Thunk deliberately avoided playing other roguelike deck builders during development. He wanted to make mistakes, to reinvent the wheel, because he didn't want to just copy what already worked. The constraint of being solo, having no budget, and intentionally ignoring established conventions forced him to innovate. And the results feel fresh specifically because it wasn't designed by some committee, or trying to check every genre convention box. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 won Game of the Year at the Game Awards 2025. 9 total wins. Made by Sandfall Interactive, a team of about 30 people with only 4 programmers, for under $10 million. The creative director, Guillaume Broche, left Ubisoft specifically because he couldn't make this game there, and his quote is very telling. A project project like this would have taken 25 years to make in a big company, and I don't have that much patience. Roche explicitly rejected open world design to conserve resources. They used miniature world maps instead of explorable territories, dedicated battle arenas instead of open world encounters, removed the minimap entirely. Focused design choices born from constraint. The game sold over 5 million copies and cost about $10 million to make. Do the math yourself. Vampire Survivor was literally a weekend hobby project that cost about 1,000 euros to make. Luca Galante wanted something to play while riding his exercise bike, so he made a game with automatic attacks, used asset store graphics because he couldn't afford custom art. The game went on to sell millions of copies, generate an estimated $57 million in revenue, and spawn an entire subgenre of survival likes. And on that note, last but not least, there's Megabonk. Megabonk is maybe the most recent example of this pattern. Solodev Vedinat made a Vampire Survivors-like roguelite that sold 1 million copies in 2 weeks, hit 42,000 concurrent players, and made it to the top 15 Steam bestsellers in its first week. And the developer celebration? I'll be eating spaghetti with extra sauce tonight. Budget? Basically none. Team size? 1 person. These are just a handful of examples that I remembered off the top of my head, but it's very telling how AAA games burn hundreds of millions on everything for everyone, while these devs prove that focused design wins, and that you can't hide behind a big budget. Where AAA went wrong. I recently watched a video from Tim Kaine, the co-creator of Fallout, that he posted in November 2024, and he basically said what we all have already been thinking.
It's kind of an overriding possible issue with today's games is they don't really know what they want to be. They try to be everything to everyone, designed by committee, making a publisher happy, trying to guess what the largest demographic wants.
He uses this perfect restaurant metaphor, where he compares old games to really high-end restaurants that prepare exquisite meals with a little bit of salt, maybe 1 or 2 seasonings, and some butter. Everything's quality over quantity. Meanwhile, modern AAA games are like a buffet. Lots of variety, but nothing's actually that good.
A problem of modern games that I see is becoming indulgent. They add too many things, thinking those more of those things make the game better, when really what they do is they dilute the game.
And we've got the receipts to prove that he's right. Concord cost over $200 million to develop. Sony spent 8 years and hired a studio full of ex-Bungie veterans. The game launched August 23rd, 2024 and was pulled from servers September 6th, 2024. 14 days. It didn't even hit 700 Steam players. And Firewalk Studios was closed permanently in October. And this failure wasn't because of bad luck. It was because of design by committee. 8 years to chase a trend that Overwatch defined in 2016, launching into a saturated market full of free-to-play competitors at a $40 price point. Characters were too generic, gameplay didn't differentiate itself, and internal culture reportedly had toxic positivity where you couldn't say anything negative about the game. Sony thought this would be their Star Wars. They learned it was a disaster 1 month before launch. Suicide Squad killed the Justice League, lost Warner Bros. $200 million. Rocksteady, legendary for single-player Batman games, got forced into live service development with no multiplayer experience. The team grew from 160 to 250 plus employees and spent 7 years iterating on scrapped concepts. Bloomberg reported staff were confused about why Captain Boomerang, known for fighting with his namesake weapon, would suddenly pivot to gunplay. Metacritic user score 3.5 out of 10. And the last example on my list is Skull and Bones. Skull and Bones started development in 2013 as an Assassin's Creed multiplayer expansion. 11 years, 3+ creative directors, multiple complete reboots later, it launched to a peak of 2,615 Steam players and is now averaging 350. Reported budget over $200 million. An anonymous developer told Kotaku nobody knew what the F they were doing. So studios with proven expertise in single-player experiences get forced into live service development, leading to design by committee, years of scope creep, and games nobody wants to play or create? Okay, who would have thought? The numbers back this up. Let's look at some facts and numbers from 2025. And it is not what the AAA industry wants to admit because it doesn't make them happy. In fact, it makes them look very bad. Indie games now capture 58% of all copies sold on Steam and 48% of total revenue. Those are record numbers. For the first time, indies are earning as much on Steam as AA and AAA releases combined. Meanwhile, AAA productions averaging over 200 million, frequently fail to recoup costs, shut down live services within months, and leave studios in ruin. Developers are deliberately choosing pixel art and chiptune aesthetic because they convey specific feelings and enable focused design. Clair Obscur use stylized visuals instead of photorealism, specifically to conserve resources while maintaining artistic vision. And player sentiment is shifting away from AAA spectacle towards authenticity and substance. Games that respect your time instead of demanding hundreds of hours of repetitive grinding. Games that do one thing incredibly well instead of trying to be everything. And if you ask me, that is the natural response to those overwhelming 100-hour open world slobs that feel more like chores, and battle passes that literally cause anxiety in gamers. Speedrunning and modding communities show us something important too. They gravitate towards games with tight, consistent mechanics. Games where mastery is possible because the systems are focused enough to understand deeply. Retro games dominate speedrunning because their design is robust. You can break them in interesting ways because the core mechanics are solid. And my prediction here isn't subtle either. The next decade of innovation in gaming won't come from who has the biggest budget. It'll come from who has the tightest vision. And honestly, that's good. And it's already happening. The games people actually remember and replay and love aren't the ones with the most features. It's the ones that do one thing incredibly well. The irony you can't ignore. What ends me about all of this is the overwhelming evidence, the clear patterns, and AAA games still keep doing the same old thing. The proven formula. Stick to what worked. A solo dev working in IT makes more money in a day than he'd earn in his entire life. A 30-person team beats studios with 10 times their budget, and meanwhile companies spending hundreds of millions can't keep games alive for more than 2 weeks. So maybe the question isn't whether constraints breed creativity anymore. The question is, when are AAA studio executives going to learn the lessons that indies keep teaching them over and over and over? Because the restaurant versus buffet thing from earlier isn't just a kawaii metaphor. It's describing two fundamentally different approaches. The restaurant has a small menu because the chef knows exactly what they're good at and they execute it perfectly. The buffet has everything because they are trying to appeal to everyone. And the result is nothing is particularly memorable. So I want to hear from you. What's a game you loved that does one thing perfectly? And what's a game that you dropped because it was just too much? I think we all have examples for both. Bye, see you next time.